One of the things that we're trying to understand more fully about behavioral addictions, online gaming, pathological gambling, any of those other kinds of problems that people do compulsively, is looking at the neurohormonal factors that are involved in that. Neurohormones are the chemicals released during the brain when people are experiencing pleasure. Dopamine is the one that's mentioned most frequently, particularly in regards to gaming. And there's a theory that I think has some merit that some people are naturally deficient in dopamine. And so life tends to be somewhat kind of flat and depressing for them. It's difficult for them to experience pleasure. When they become involved in an activity like gaming that becomes very exciting to them, they have kind of a burst of dopamine or very high release of dopamine that feels very pleasurable to them. So of course they tend to go back to the activity repeatedly where they get that release of dopamine. The concern with that is that as they get better and better at gaming, the dopamine system becomes more efficient in that they only get that kind of dopamine release when they're engaged in that activity. So the rest of the world becomes even less rewarding from a biological standpoint. So it's almost like they're missing the drug, you know, if we looked at it that way. So there's a tendency to want to go back to the game more and more frequently just to maintain that sense of being okay or being at peace. You know, we also know not everybody is having fun gaming. Some recent studies have shown that the people who are the most compulsive and spend the most time in the game are actually not reporting fun. They're reporting a lot of stress and agitation. And it's a compulsion that they can't stop, even though they'll say, you know, I'm not really enjoying it anymore. The most frequent thing that I'm seeing happening in therapy now is a very interesting phenomenon where children who are playing excessively, and I'm talking about as young as 8 years old, children from the age of 8 up to 17, 18, have been taking parents' credit cards and going online to one of the online sites like IGE is one of the well-known ones, and punching in mom's credit card number to buy virtual currency. So this of course creates some very dramatic problems. There was one recent case, several recent cases that are very interesting, but one that actually erupted into domestic violence. Another case where the child had created so much debt that the family had to sell their car in order to pay it off. And again, these are kind of extreme behaviors, particularly when you're talking about little kids. The other thing that comes up consistently is when one partner is playing compulsively and you know, the other partner is feeling that it's almost like they're married to an alcoholic or a drug addict, and the relationship has just completely gone down the tubes and there's no longer any connection between the two of them. So those are two things that are increasingly common that people need help with. Parents concerned about their kids, concerned about their academics, a lot of people who have dropped out of college, some of those folks are coming in independently asking for help. But very often the person calling initially for help is not necessarily the gamer, because when people are very caught up in a compulsive behavior, they're not realizing what's going on. They're kind of lacking that self-awareness that I always talk about that's so important. People are definitely having intimate relationships in MMOs. Of course, this is not a secret in some of the virtual worlds like Second Life and there's a new one, Red Light Center, I think, which have certain areas certainly that are designed for people basically hooking up sexually. It happens in MMOs too, although in MMOs I think it's a lot less overt. But definitely there's a lot of activity going on. A lot of people meet in MMOs, develop friendships, that evolve into romantic relationships, and they do end up meeting in real life. And I know several that have gotten married or are living together now, and in some cases those relationships have worked out very well. That's not always true, however, and of course if you've been involved in the game world for any period of time, most of us have heard of the tragic stories where two people have gotten together and it's turned out that one is not the gender that they were pretending to be. And often this is looked at as something that's a big joke. But some people have been very, very wounded by that. You know, you never know who the person behind the avatar is. And it's also very interesting that this is a world where you may have individuals as young as 8 years old interacting and being involved with in all kinds of ways with people who may be as old as 60 or 70 and every age group in between. And this is something that you would never find in real life. And I think there are all kinds of ramifications for that, that while there may be some positives, there can be some real troubling aspects to that too. I think the best thing for parents is to play along with their kids. If they're going to allow their kids to play in MMOs, they need to be playing with them, because otherwise there can be all kinds of strange things going on. Again, this is a world, and it's not a world that's policed or monitored. One of the things that I think is really important to stress is that the problem is not necessarily the games and not necessarily the gamers, but it's really what happens when games that are structured to be highly immersive and reinforcing, very much like gambling, when those kind of games meet people with certain vulnerabilities. And I think that's when we're seeing some of the really extreme problems happen. I think research is rather preliminary right now, so in a few years we're going to understand this a lot better than we understand it now. But I don't think there's any doubt that we need to look at it closely and do some things differently. What I'd like to see happen, certainly games are not going to go away, and there are people that would like to see that happen. There are people that would like to see government regulation, as is happening in China right now. I don't think we're going to see that happen in this country. But what I would like to see happen is that people who work in game development become more aware of the consequences of the structure of what they're doing. And I have talked to developers who have a very strong sense of social consciousness and have said, you know, we don't want to create things that are going to harm people. We want to create things that are fun, things that help people learn, things that enrich their lives. And I think that's what I'd like to see, you know, see the direction that the industry goes in. Bottom line is, for some of the large companies, they're making incredible amounts of money, millions of dollars. And it's all about profit and how to keep people immersed and how to keep people hooked, how to keep up the player base, how to increase the player base. They'll even brag about the term addiction, and that people are so addicted to the game. It's almost like it's funny. And in real life, what I'm seeing is that the consequences are not funny for a lot of people. And I think I'd like to see, you know, we're not going to eliminate games, but I'd certainly like to see gaming move in a healthier direction with more awareness of the cost to individuals and families and society as a whole.